Grab your pitchforks and rotten fruit. You're entering the show that encourages dangerous discussions with God's holy book. I'm your host, Ryan White, and this is Conversations with the Bible. Welcome, everyone, to another Conversations with the Bible. This week, the special guest is Mr. Judah Himango, who is one of the congregational leaders at Tabernacle of David, where I fellowship up here in Minnesota. This week, we're talking about an interesting topic. It's dealing with how to speak to atheists, how to witness to them. Now, I do have to apologize. We did have some technical issues, so there's going to be a little bit of cutting out of him, but hopefully there's still enough there. It was only a couple times. Hopefully you really enjoy the show. I had a great time. Welcome, everyone, to another Conversations with the Bible. We had some really great discussions in the last couple weeks where we were talking about kind of really in-depth stuff on what is the Bible, where does it come from, can we trust the Bible, and talking about what is oftentimes called critical scholarship, looking at the Bible from the lens of how did we actually get it, and sometimes this subject makes people uncomfortable, but I was really surprised. We had some really good responses. So what I felt like was a really good follow-up to this is a show where we're talking about conversing with atheists. And that may not make that connection in your mind between the two subjects, but for me, that was a real big, strong connection there, because a lot of times we kind of feel like we have to defend the Bible at every single turn to atheists, and oftentimes they kind of detect our level of discomfort with the text, and they use things and they start to try to poke holes in our beliefs based on our insecurities. And so, I felt it was really good to kind of, show people where our Bible comes from, so we don't need to be so insecure. But on the flip side, we take our insecurities and then we try to use those to sometimes go out and reach out to these atheists. And I would propose to you that a lot of times we take the wrong routes in doing that. So I have on the show with me this week a very good friend of mine, Mr. Judah Himango. Hello, Judah.
Hey, Ryan.
Judah is a local congregational leader at the congregation I go to here in Minneapolis. It is Tabernacle of David in Burnsville, just south of the Twin Cities. And he also has the longest run? Yeah, there we go. I'm reading it off here. The longest running messianic blog on the web, now in its 13th year.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a little longer. I think I haven't updated that little side blurb in a year or two. So yeah, I think it's the longest running messianic blog. It's been about 15 years now. So
nice.
Yeah.
So that is, you can go to blog.judahgabriel.com, and we'll put the link under the podcast too for you. But Judah, why don't you tell us a little bit about this blog that you're doing? And a little bit about yourself too.
Sure thing. Yep. So I was raised in the Messianic movement. My parents were are Messianic believers, and I got involved in Messianic music when I was really young. My parents, didn't want us listening to secular music, I guess. So we listened to some old school Lamb and Israel's Hope and, some other Messianic music from decades ago, I guess. Mm-hmm. And as I grew older, I still really liked Messianic music. I personally think it's a legacy that we have in the Messianic world, and so that out of that, I was inspired to build a Messianic radio station, kind of in the vein of Pandora, and so I built MessianicRadio.com, which just kind of plays Messianic music. You can thumb up and down songs, and I also built MessianicChords.com, which is kind of guitar chords and piano sheet music for Messianic music. So that's really my big focus. And of course, I lead music at Tabernacle of David, like you just mentioned. So I'd say that's really where the Lord has drawn me in my life. But I've also done some teaching. The blog, I've really, it's helped me formulate kind of my thinking around all things related to God. Sometimes, you have these ideas in your head, and it's difficult to, I don't know. I guess when you put them to word and you actually write them out, it helps clarify your own thinking on things. And then I think it also helps too when you put an idea out there on the open web. You get all sorts of opinions on it, as I'm sure you know, Ryan. People will come at you from every angle. And so you get a sense of what is defensible, and what holds up to scrutiny. I could point you to post 10 years ago or something where I believed things that I later found out, hey, I shouldn't believe those things. That's not real. I used to be, as many Hebrew roots folks tend to be, I used to be pretty paganoid about things. So I think that helps too. So that's the blog has been useful to me, and hopefully to some Messianic folks as well.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed. I don't get on there all the time, but when I do, you have some really good articles. And that's part of the reason I like to bring you on here with this show in particular, is because you have been very realistic. I would use the word realistic on a lot of these situations, and I feel unfortunately sometimes we get our religious gusto going, and we're like, yes, we're gonna, this is the way to do it, but a lot of times that doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah. I think we kind of live in a religious bubble sometimes where it's like it works maybe with people who are as zealous and on, very close to the same page as you are. But I think when we engage with not even reaching out as far as atheism, but even just to Christianity and broader Judaism, it's, you realize that, oh gosh, this doesn't work, or we are way off on our own tangent here, and maybe we should reconsider some things. So yeah, it is good. It is good to kind of engage with the broader world, and that's something I've appreciated about you, Ryan. Is you've not only engaged with scholarship, but I think you've kind of looked at things from a broader perspective. So I've felt some. I feel like we're on a similar page there. So that's been helpful.
Yeah, one of the things that inspired this show too was I'd read somewhere, I was reading someone's article, and they were asking, well, how do I reach out to atheists? And the responses were, as you can imagine, here's this Ken Ham video, and here's this Ron White video, and this, that, and the other. And for those of you who are unaware of those are those are people who have these arguments over creation versus evolution, and Ron Wyatt believes he's found the Ark of the Covenant and all sort, Mount Ararat. I don't know everything.
Right. The Ark of the Covenant was his big one, and a million things, it seems. Yeah. But, and I
go ahead.
If I can interject there, I think part of that too is kind of an outgrowth of, we haven't engaged with scholarship, and so we don't really know, and I'm speaking really particular to the Hebrew roots world, but Ron White, for example, he's discredited. Even in a lot of young earth creationist circles, he's discredited because he made really sensational claims. But we see this sort of embrace of both sensationalism and just a lack of scholarship, really a rejection of all authority. And when you take that and you try to reach out to the broader world, it's ineffective. It largely is ineffective. And I think that's something that needs to change. And again, it comes back to just engaging with scholarship, kind of seeing how more than our little religious bubble views these things, that will help us when discussing these matters outside of our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And those, like you said, I mean, he's discredited, and maybe for those of you viewers out there who've heard him and you like him, maybe you don't feel he's discredited, and that's great on your own personal level. But realize that when there's certain stuff that we believe that is just not going to be accepted by the majority of people. They're not going to find that credible.
it's really about what is going to be persuasive to the person you're talking to. And, there are things that if you're going to talk to an atheist, chances are going to be, not persuasive at all. And some of the things that you just mentioned are such things. I've heard other people, give arguments like, well, dinosaur bones, maybe they were just placed there to, test our faith, placed there by God to test our faith. And I just think such arguments are not only ineffective, but actually make us to be kind of a mockery to those that we are speaking to. So I think we can do a lot better.
Absolutely. A video that you shared, I think you'd shared it at Tabernacle of David, or maybe you mentioned it there, and I went back and watched it, was that Billy Graham video, the TED Talk.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was really impressive. How, so Billy Graham, a TED Talk is, remind me what TED stands for again, technology?
It's technology, entertainment, and design.
Okay. And so he's talking to, presumably a group of people who may have been raised Christian, but probably most of them are, I'm assuming, would probably not consider themselves Christian anymore.
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of the technologist crowd in Silicon Valley, which he was speaking to, is generally keeps God at an arm's length. I would even go as far to say a great majority are either agnostic or atheists. So yeah, he spoke to a non-religious crowd, and he did it quite effectively. And I think we could probably talk about some of those things, but he did it not by trying to convince about evolution versus atheism or anything like that, but he connected to people through on their level first, but also by telling some stories that I think change people's minds. I think it shows the power of stories, and perhaps why the Bible is such a influential thing in the world is because stories resonate with human beings. There's something in our minds that really connect to stories, and he just did a fantastic job, and I thought it was really persuasive. And by the end of his TED Talk, this largely secular audience gave him a standing ovation. So it was quite impressive.
Yeah, and you mentioned stories connecting with us. It's so funny because some of the stuff that I remember the most from my childhood is stories that were that were completely fictional stories, and yet. They affect how I act to this day.
Yeah. Wow.
One of the ones that really sticks out is, and I remember telling my kids this just the other day, and they thought it was just the dumbest thing ever that I do this.
Okay.
But I remember being told this story about a kid who basically he went for the biggest, best piece of food at this meal. So he went for the biggest, shiniest apple, and the apple ended up having a worm in it. Then he went for the biggest piece of pie, and it ended up like having no filling in it. Yeah. And all this stuff. And so to this day, I will never grab the biggest slice of pizza. I always go for that middle of the road thing. And I know that realistically the biggest piece is probably not the worst piece.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think we were talking a little bit about this at your house the other week. Yeah. I heard a similar story by, I think it was Booker T. Washington, an autobiography, and he said, my mom always told me when I was a kid that, you only put a little syrup on the pancakes because if you spread the syrup around, then it's just as much as if you'd put a ton of syrup on there. And he said, once I got to be a teenager, I realized, she's just trying to conserve the syrup. We didn't have a lot of money and so on. But he said, to this day, I still just put a little syrup on and then spread it around. And, and he's like, and I swear it's as much as if I poured a whole bunch on there. So, yeah. So point is stories can really impact you, even if they're fictional, or even if they're, not based in history. Now, we do believe the Bible is historical and useful, but there's also stories in the Bible, and not all of those stories are true. We talk about in the Gospels, the parables that Yeshua tells, clearly are fictional, and yet have a impactful point to them, and so they are useful.
Yeah, and realistically, if you think about how secular society interacts with the Bible today,
Hmm.
you still hear about the Good Samaritan, from
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
people who don't even believe in the Bible, and yet they take that story.
Mm.
And so from my point of view is I think sometimes we spend so much time defending the historical accuracy of the Bible to
Mm.
ourselves
Mm.
and to these atheists or just maybe middle of the road Christians, or we spend so much time
Mm.
trying to defend the historical accuracy of the Bible to them that we forget that even without having to prove its historical accuracy, it's a beautiful story, has
Hmm.
beautiful stories that do impact, should I say,
Yeah. Yeah.
people's
Indeed.
lives to this very day.
Yes.
Um, and when you think about it, realistically, how much of these stories in the Bible can you actually prove? Is there any
Oh, right.
historical
Yeah.
data that proves that Balaam's donkey talked to him? you know?
Right. Right. Indeed. Yeah. I mean, many of them are not provable, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Did I lose you there?
okay. Yeah. I was just saying. Yeah. Even for things that aren't historical, the point is there. For example, I think the story of Jonah. The point. I suppose there's multiple points in that story, but one big one is you get God's character in that. That even a wicked people. Um, God desires that they would repent, and here's this religious guy who's like, no.
Oh, sorry, we lost Judah again there. What I wanted to do really quickly, and while we're waiting to get him back on the air, is talk about something that I had forgotten to talk about earlier on, which is the concept of there being three different types of truths. Okay, the first one that we know about is, of course, what we call historical truth, historical accuracy, and this is a type of truth that if someone shot a gun and killed someone, we know historically accurate that this person did indeed shoot a gun. Now, the thing with these types of historical truths is that they're oftentimes subject to interpretation. Why did this person shoot the gun? And this is where oftentimes we see a lot of people disagreeing on why a certain event happened or the significance of a certain event. So that's one type of truth, okay? And this is where, if you have historical, what happened, there was a battle between Israel and this other nation. Well, from Israel's point of view, they won the battle because Yahweh, the God of Israel, helped them win. But from another nation's perspective, maybe it was because they didn't serve their god Chemosh well enough or something like that. We actually see this in historical writings, this idea of different versions. So that's one type of truth. The other type of truth is a type of truth that tells us something true about reality. And this is the type of truth that I would propose to you that is the most important. This is why Yeshua could tell parables, which parables are untrue story from a historical perspective, and yet they carry in them a type of truth that transcends whether or not they're historically accurate or not. They tell us something true about the human condition or about how God rules the universe. And I'm going to propose to you that that is the type of truth that we should be focusing on teaching other people, especially those who are going to have a hard time initially accepting the historical truth found in the Bible. Not saying that the Bible's not true, just that some people are going to have a hard time accepting that until they recognize that second type of truth, and that is the truth that speaks about the human condition, about relationships, and about God. And then the third type of truth is when Yeshua speaks of himself being the truth. And someone being the truth is not something that really fits into those two types of categories. When Yeshua speaks about himself being the truth, he's speaking about his way of living and his actions, the way that he proceeds forth in that way that God intended the world to be. Okay, so sorry for the little sidebar there. We lost Judah. We're going to bring him back on right now.
Paul, when he talks to people, I think he's talking at their level, and I think that might have to do with we have that that quote from Paul in one of his epistles where he says, to the Jews I became a Jew, or to the Greeks I became a Greek, and so on. I think it's not about presenting yourself as fake. I think it has to do with speaking to people at their level in terms they can understand, that are persuasive to them. And I think that's precisely what Billy Graham did in that TED Talk, where he gave examples from the technology world, from even the agnostic world, to prove a larger point that indeed we have this great problem in humanity that's not being addressed by science, not by technology, not by medicine, and that problem is the human heart and its propensity towards wickedness. So it was really powerful, and I think that's a good example for us when we do speak to unbelievers.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, I was just sitting there trying to summarize what you're saying, and that really hits home the idea of, first off, you have to know your audience. You can't. Yeah. You actually have to care about them enough to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and isn't that difficult too? Because for a lot of religious people, we don't want to read atheist stuff. We don't want to engage with that world, because I think this maybe goes to your point about us being insecure in our beliefs, but I think a lot of religious people are kind of scared to talk about, or even scared to look at what atheists believe and what's their answers to our assertions here and there about the Bible, about the universe, about life, and so on.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult for a lot of religious people to even engage with that audience, because we don't want to even see what they believe, really. We want to keep them at arm's length. We want to say they're, hey, you're going to hell, or I don't want to you're off in your own world and I don't want to talk to you. It's that sort of attitude we get in the religious world. So that, I think you're right. It's like, that's, if we want to actually be persuasive in this world, which is increasingly secular, at least in the West here, if we want to engage with this world, we do have to see what it is that secular people believe. What are the arguments atheists have against belief in God? Otherwise, we can't really engage him. It says in the Proverbs, it kind of just came to mind, but Proverbs says, one man's opinion sounds right until another presents his opposing view, something to that effect. And I think that's really true, right? Like, how can we defend our faith and actually make a persuasive argument for our faith in God if we don't know what the arguments against it is? Engagement is maybe like step one. Like, you have to understand what they believe. And I understand it's difficult. I don't particularly like doing that, because it can make you question your faith, and it can make you uneasy. But if we want to engage with the world beyond our little religious bubble, I think we have to.
Yeah. Yeah, you look at what Paul did. I think it was in, I don't remember, somewhere later part of Acts, where he's at. I think it's Mars Hill, and he engages with the crowd by talking about the unknown God.
Yes.
He doesn't even, like, you guys need to believe in Yahweh or Yehovah or there's no sacred naming in there. It's not even the God of Israel.
Yeah. He says the unknown God.
The unknown God. It's like, you guys understand that there's a force in the world, and I look at that as almost the same thing Billy Graham does. I mean, this is a guy who's how old was he at that point in time? Like 80? I mean,
he was in his late 80s. Yeah, he was in his late 80s, I think. Yeah.
I mean, this has got probably a guy who still uses dial telephones, and he's at a technology conference. So I mean, how much more out of your element? And yet, I mean, he not only had an impact on them, but I think through that video, he's made an impact on me and made me rethink how I need to not only address atheists, but even just people who believe anything slightly different from me.
Yeah, agreed. It's a great example, and I just encourage the listeners to check it out. Billy Graham TED Talk. It's really fantastic.
Right. So let's kind of shift gears and talk about human evil.
Okay.
Because we've seen human evil, in the United States, we don't really have as much human evil as a lot of other countries, but in particular, North Korea has been in the news a lot lately, and I've actually been very fascinated by what's going on. It's really kind of given me some hope for the future, seeing how this is actually going, turning out.
You're speaking about the North Korean diplomacy stuff? Yeah.
The potential for denuclearization, and to quantify or qualify this, I do think that there's a lot more than just taking away the nukes. But when someone's got a gun to your head, the first thing you do is you get the gun away, and then you start to talk about the issues underlying that.
Yeah, indeed. I'm personally kind of skeptical. If it turns out that this works for good and he actually destroys his arsenal of nuclear weapons, wonderful. Someone pointed out that the Kim family has made these promises since the 1990s. There's been 12 different promises of removing weapons or nuclear weapons, and so I'm skeptical that it'll come about, but we'll see. And with regards to evil, a lot of people don't realize how wicked that particular regime is. They've, we were talking right before the show, Ryan, that North Koreans have persecuted believers. There was a significant number of Christians, for example, in North Korea. I shouldn't even say North Korea, at the time of the split of the Civil War and the split between the Koreas.
Yeah,
and
they said it was like over 50 or near 50%.
Yeah. It was really high, and now it's very small, as I recall, like less than 1%. And even those who do believe, they have to go underground because North Korea does persecute people. And this isn't just theoretical or speculation. We've actually had people who have escaped North Korean prison camps, which are really concentration camps.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a man who gave his testimony before Congress just a few years ago. We have it on video, where he describes what life was like in these political camps. Anyone who was disliked by the party was sent there, whether political or religious or any other suspicion of being rebellious. They were sent there, and they're truly tortured. Not fed well, not fed enough. This man had described, it was a wonderful day if they could, if there was a rat coming up through the toilet, so that they could actually have meat, for the first time in so long. They could actually eat decent. People being just brutally beaten, and then truly worked to death, where they work them without giving them enough food and water, and many eventually die. So truly a wicked regime. And it's interesting because we've had a lot of, we look at the 20th century, and I think some of the greatest evils have actually come out of, I won't say atheism itself, I'll say this. Some of the greatest evils of the 20th century have come out of men who were atheists and also had absolute power. And some examples of this would be Joseph Stalin. Stalin's Soviet Russia persecuted. I think the figure is something between 40 and 50 million non-combatants. So we're not even talking about in the war. We're talking about afterwards, persecution of religious people, of intellectuals, of people who are not seen as loyal to the state. Yeah. And I think, that's one example of many. Mao Zedong, he's killed more non-combatants than anyone. It's 70 million non-combatants that he killed, and also it's an atheist regime. In fact, just today, kind of on that point, let me see if I can bring this up. Oh yeah, okay. So this is interesting. This was an article that just appeared in the Associated Press, I believe it is, and it says, hour upon hour, day by day, Omir Bekali and other detainees in China's new indoctrination camps have to disavow their beliefs, criticize themselves and their loved ones, and get this, and give thanks to the ruling Communist Party. That giving thanks to the ruling party really points to, if you remove God, people end up serving something. And I think in a lot of these absolute dictatorships where God is removed, in Stalin's Russia, the education system was, forcibly atheist. They would teach atheism. I think when you remove God, people serve something, and that something just ends up being whoever's in power. And that's why you see such it's almost like a atheist religion, and I don't say that lightly. Like when you're saying, hey, you have to disavow your beliefs and give thanks to the ruling party, you're just replacing God with a political party. And I think that desire for absolute power speaks to the evil in human hearts. Going back to what we talked about with Billy Graham, the human heart is evil, desires self-pleasure, desires power, desires money, desires women, any pleasure you could imagine. And in these states where God has been removed, then the person who's pushing for that just says, well, look, God doesn't exist, therefore I can do anything I want in this world. I'm going to maximize my own pleasure, my own power. And you end up with these totalitarian states that are truly the greatest humanitarian crises that we've ever seen. I mean, atheists will often talk to me and say, well, yeah, look at the horrible religious people in the Crusades. I say, well, yeah, the Crusades, several thousand to maybe 1 million were killed. It's horrible. It's terrible. And it is a shame on Christianity for at least part of the Crusades. But that pales in comparison to the 50 million killed by Stalin or the 70 million killed by Mao Zedong. And we're not talking Middle Ages stuff here. We're talking, just decades ago. So I really do believe that belief in God and fear of God, saying God will judge me for what I do in this life, I think tempers the evil heart of humanity. And we say, hey, we're not going to do these wicked things, and instead we're actually going to do good. We're going to love God, and we're going to love our neighbor because that's what pleases God. I think that creates a better world and really tempers our evil hearts.
It's really interesting that you bring all this up, because I've been studying for the book of Revelation, and my take on it is I'm going to completely get rid of any of the type of prediction of the future stuff.
Good. Yeah. Okay, good.
Obviously that hasn't worked out. We've had enough of that.
Yes.
And maybe that stuff's right, I don't know, but that's not the angle that I want to read into it.
Yes.
But it's interesting, because what you're talking about is actually how I've been studying the book of Revelation. When you're looking at from the historical perspective and looking at it from the literary perspective, that's actually what the book of Revelation is trying to deal with. The book of Revelation is written around 90 A.D., and there's reasons why I set that date, and I'll explain that stuff on the future podcast or on my website or whatever.
Sure.
But this is a time where emperor worship was on the rise, where the worship of imperial cult was the fastest growing religion, and it was the biggest issue. The biggest challenge that the believers in Yeshua were facing was people. We don't realize it's not just the word. It's not just like you go into your private room and you pray to Caesar. That's not what we're talking about here. This is the worship of the government.
Which
Caesar is the government, right?
That reflects exactly what I was saying with the Communist Party in different countries now, where it is the government and it's absolute power, and they see themselves as gods or demigods.
Yeah, and so it's the whole idea with apocalyptic literature is the what they call the literature of resistance. It's encouraging people, don't give in, don't worship the state, and a lot of times we don't realize, like I said, it's not going off and praying to Caesar in your private closet. This was, if you want to go out for like a business lunch, you didn't go out to Chili's or even Starbucks. You went to a place where they are actively participating in offering sacrifices to Caesar and to Zeus and to these other things. They're actively, the serving girls aren't just there to bring you food; they're to bring you to other stuff too.
I see.
And it's just amazing that sort of a message still speaks to us today in countries like North Korea. Resist the empire, resist the North Korean regime, resist communism, and even in America today, even though we don't face the same level of persecution, I think on both sides of the political party, we always need to be very conscious of where our allegiance is going towards.
Yes, yeah, indeed. That is kind of a danger too with us. I think we get swept up in politics, especially when there's kind of this cultural war going on in the United States with, pushing of a secular agenda or a sinful agenda of different kinds from kind of the secular world. It's easy for us to get wrapped up in party, but we have to remember we're not allied to any party. I mean, there's a power bigger than party, and that power is God, and that's our ultimate allegiance. And I think we, even believers here, I don't know. I guess I've seen maybe a move towards party too much, where we're like, we're all Republicans, or we're all conservatives or whatever. I have a funny story about that. I was giving a teaching at our congregation a year or two ago, and a woman who was a Presbyterian minister was in the audience, a relative of someone who attends there pretty regularly, and afterwards, after the teaching, she said, "Oh, thank you for the teaching. I enjoyed that. Blah blah blah." But she goes, we start talking a little bit about politics and so on, because I know some of the Presbyterians are more on the left side of things, and she goes, "Yep, but I know there's so many of us are just on the left, but I always have to remind my congregation that God even loves Republicans." And I laughed, and I said, "Oh, that's funny. I have to remind my congregation, God, it is really easy to get pulled up in politics, but we have to remember that there is something bigger." Dennis Prager, a guy I really look up to, I quoted him a bit in my last post. He said, "Fear of God explains why a disproportionately high number of dissidents in totalitarian societies have been believers in God." So people who are rebelling against a totalitarian government are often believers in God. And he said, "When I visited the Soviet Union in 1969, I smuggled out a Soviet Jewish dissident song whose lyrics included the words," and I'm going to butcher the Russian because I don't speak Russian, "Nai busa nikovo krom Boga odnavo," which means "I fear no one except God, the only one." And Prager says, this was remarkable because the vast majority of Soviet Jews were not religious, but they understood something, kind of a simple fact. He said, they understood that if one fears no one except God, then you can muster the courage not to fear a totalitarian state. And I think that may go along with what you were saying about Revelation, how it's kind of encouraging these believers who are in a totalitarian state that is forcing them or trying to force them into idolatry and into worship of a government, to say, hey, no, be encouraged, because even if it gets as bad as they can throw it at you, even if they kill you, even if they torture you, fear God, because God has the final say and he'll resurrect you in that day. And, I think of towards the end of Revelation, really speaks to that too. It says, those who were persecuted for the sake of Messiah, and those who were beheaded for his sake, which we know many of the believers in Rome were, those who were beheaded for his namesake, that they will be raised up. It says they'll see the resurrection. They'll be raised up in that day. God will have vindication in that last day. So I really like your take on Revelation. I'm looking forward to what comes of that. But I agree with that it's really trying to encourage the believers, not only in that day, but today, for the people who are suffering persecution. It is comforting to know that God is the ultimate power and not a totalitarian state.
Yeah, and I think that's really the biggest message. Again, it's not setting timetables, not telling you to get on your NASA website and look everything up. It's telling you that even if you die, you're going to be vindicated, and you don't need to be afraid of the big scary beast. This, you
Yeah.
don't need to be afraid of Monster Soda because it has the vav 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 on it.
Right. Yes.
And unfortunately, we turn these things into fear. It's every so often you see these. Oh, you got to be scared because this is the beast. This is the mark of the beast. But the whole point of that was, don't fear these things. Put your trust in God. And actually, it's interesting. The Book of Revelation actually has more stuff about worship in it than any other book. It is the book most focused on worship. So it's saying, stop being scared of these things. Worship God. And he will vindicate you, and he's also going to bring judgment on the systems. It's not even really so much the people, going back to Jonah. Jonah was looking for the people to be judged, but it's the systems of this world that God is really going to judge.
Yes, yeah, very good. Yeah, I think that encouragement to the believers really shines through. We have a historical writing, I don't recall... It was a Roman historian, not a Christian, but he records that because the believers didn't fear the Roman government, even under terrible persecution, even they're putting them to death by burning, by feeding them to wild animals, beheadings, and worse. He said, yeah, they didn't have any fear, so what the Roman authorities would do then is say, well, you're not going to be resurrected because once we kill you, we're going to burn your body to ashes, and then we're going to spread your ashes out on a river, so there's no way, you can be resurrected, as if that would take away their hope of the resurrection. It's a powerful message, Revelation, and really just, I don't know, I think it's one of the general themes of the Bible is that God is ultimately in control. The Psalms, even going back to the Psalms, we see, what does it say? I will trust no man, or I won't put my hope in princes, or something to that effect. I'll only trust in God. So it is encouraging. And just speaking for myself, like I am encouraged that this life doesn't end with our death, that we who do put our trust in God will see God on that day, because God is good and God is righteous, and he will raise up those who he sees fit. So that's encouraging to me,
Yeah, and I think that's really something that needs to be spoken to this generation of non-believers, is that message of encouragement, because we see so much anger and hurt and everything going on out there. I mean, we just had this last week in the media, two big people. I don't remember their names. Some chef and some actress or something like that.
Anthony Bourdain, and I forget the actress's name.
That committed suicide, and suicides. After that, they said suicide's like the number 9 cause of death in the United States. I mean, that is. So you got that, and then you've got drug overdoses, which really, I mean, you could almost put those in the same category, because a lot of times these drug overdoses are because people are, they're in misery.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to escape perhaps something that happened to them, or perhaps they're just addicted to it, and they can't get free, and then they end up, it drives them to suicide. Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. I'm looking at suicide rates here, just looking that up, and we have, age standard rate. Yeah, it looks like it's, we're one of the higher ones here in the U.S., so I mean, just the fear, that goes back to the fear of God. How we live will affect our standing with God. Yeshua says at the end of Revelation, I come quickly to judge every man according to his works. Like what we do in this life does matter. So it's an important message to this generation, which, kind of tying back to the atheism stuff, Ryan, I feel like this generation is unique because not only have we had a resurgence of atheism, perhaps unlike we've seen in human history, but that resurgence of atheism has spread so much because of media. We have access to it unlike any other time, between 24/7 TV, cable news in the 80s, and the internet in the 90s, and mobile phones. We have computers with us at all times now. I think people have access to that, and so that atheism, I think it's I don't know, the explosion of media combined with a resurgence in atheism has really influenced a lot of people. That's why you see, the new atheists have a great following. Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, these guys have great followings because it's impacted a lot of people. So I really think we have a lot of work cut out for us, and our message is more than just eternal life. Like we're talking resurrection, even though I think that's perhaps the greatest thing.
Yeah,
God has the final say, and you're not gonna die, and it's gonna be over with. But no, you'll actually there's life beyond death. That's a major thing. But I think we have more to our cause as well.
And I think the idea of eternal life really is powerful when you're in to someone in North Korea, when you're suffering. The harsh brutality of that sort of thing. But when we live in a world where people haven't faced persecution, and most of you out there who've listened to me, I'm a huge proponent of teaching about the resurrection. In fact, I always mention it. Had Yeshua just died and not resurrected, our faith would be worthless, as Paul says. But speaking to this younger generation, I'm not sure that that's the main message that we need to bring. That maybe because there's because I work in an intensive care unit, and so we see a lot of these people coming in who are drug overdoses and stuff like that. And as we've been and this is really as we've been talking here, I've been sitting here thinking, maybe our biggest challenge in this generation is not fearing the afterlife, fearing judgment, but finding hope and love in this current life. I think there's a lot of people that just don't feel love, they don't feel value, they don't feel worth.
Yeah, so I very much agree. I think resurrection is a powerful message, but to people who aren't suffering, perhaps it's not a powerful message. Perhaps it's like, well, I'm especially young people, right? Young people don't think about death, right? No one likes to think about their death. Young people never even consider it. And it's kind of to that point. I remember years ago, my mom had a kind of a scare with cancer, and after I get off the phone with her, I'm kind of devastated, and then I thought about it. I'm like, wow, what if my mom died? And I realized I had never considered what happens if one of my parents die, let alone myself, right? And I'm like in my 20s then, late 20s. So yeah, we don't like to think about death. So perhaps resurrection isn't a powerful thing. You're saying, Ryan, that showing love and compassion and caring for people can be persuasive. I agree. I came across this article some years ago. I've probably told you about this, but actually it wasn't even in an article. The Salvation Army, which is a religious organization, a lot of people, kind of skip over that, I guess, but they're a religious Christian organization, hence Salvation Army. They had said something to the effect of, well, if you are going to work for us, you must affirm our no, it wasn't even that. I think it was if we can't sanction gay marriages or something because of our religious beliefs, something to that effect. And of course, the atheist world just came out and just totally trashed them, called them bigots, and as is often the case. But in the comments to this article, and there's 2,000 comments on this article, as just bashing the Salvation Army for their bigotry and their homophobia and all this. Then someone in the comments goes, now hold on a minute, and this kind of goes to your point. He goes, and he's British, and he goes, when I was young, my dad wasn't present, and it was 4 of us kids and my mom, and we had nothing. We were dirt poor. We barely had enough for meals every day. And he goes, but every Christmas, Salvation Army came and brought presents for all of us and fed us this huge, rich meal. And he goes, and, forgive me for language here, but he goes, that meant so effing much. And he goes, so I will always, and he goes, now that I have money and I'm grown, I will always give money to this organization. I will always support them, regardless of even if I don't agree with all their beliefs, because they helped me and my family when no one else would. And I thought, wow, that really does speak to the power of caring for people. And look, to be honest, I mean, when we look in the Gospels, I mean, I know you're going through the Gospel cycle, Ryan, but I mean, Yeshua talks about it in the Gospels, how, you know, if we care for people, it's as if we're caring for Messiah himself. And even going before the Gospels, if you go to the Torah, we see all of these provisions for caring for the widow and the orphan and helping those who are oppressed. So I think we have a not only a basis for caring for people, but we actually have commandments in the Torah and from the mouth of Messiah himself to show love and compassion. I mean, Yeshua said the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And so I think that is very powerful to people almost in any state, is if you actually care about people, you feed them, you help them, whatever you can do, and you just show them that you sincerely care, that's powerful. So I really do think that can be another part of our message to the secular world.
Yeah, you know, look at what we've done. You know, not look at what we've done. I guess that doesn't come out right, but you know, look at what believers in Yeshua have done, how they've impacted people, and you know, this is something that you and I have talked about. I know some people don't agree, but you know, in reality, believers in Yeshua, Christians, have had a huge impact on how the world is in the last 2,000 years. I mean, the invention of hospitals, medicine, all of that stuff came about because of believers in Yeshua actually caring about other human beings.
Yes, that's right. And I know we talked about this the other week, but this is even recognized by atheists. I was listening to Steven Pinker, a podcast with Steven Pinker. He's written several books, one called Enlightenment Now, that's a bestseller right now, where he's just saying the world's getting better, but he's an atheist, right? And on this podcast, he's saying, he's talking to Jordan Peterson, actually, and in this podcast, he's saying, well, you know, the church has venerated, you know, this one guy because he healed one person, you know, big deal. And we know miracles don't actually happen, he would say. And Jordan Peterson said, but do you think religion has actually played any good role in all this? And even Pinker, the atheist, has to say, he goes, well, I will say something. As good as the Romans and Greeks were for innovation, they really lacked in compassion, and Christianity brought compassion to the world, where you don't just care about yourself, but you actually care for other people. And this, you know, he goes on to say, you know, helps lead to things like hospitals and so on. So yeah, it really does, and people outside of our religious niche can see that too. Even atheists outside of our world can see that. So it is powerful.
And I mean, if you think about it, and the Romans were pretty much the lead in technology in their day. I mean, they built aqueducts and roads, and but with all of that technology, they also slaughtered people, and you know, just did terrible things at the same time. So
and you know, that's another thing we should keep in mind too. A lot of, and I've been tempted by this thinking too. I work in technology, and technology has made so many things so much better. And so a lot of us technologists kind of assume, well, you know, technology is just going to solve all of the human problems we have. I mean, one of the co-founders of Google founded Calico, which is aimed at basically eternal life, saying, hey, I think we can figure out a way to make humans live indefinitely. So we really think we can solve all the problems, but as you just pointed out, technology doesn't make us good people. It can be used for good, and it can be used for bad, but it doesn't make us better people. The Romans were highly advanced technologically, and to kind of extend that to today, think about the 20th century. We in the 20th century invented flight and you know, cars and computers and the radio, all kinds of stuff, right? And not to mention technology as far as war goes. But all of those things, and we had actually the deadliest century in the history of the world. and two world wars. That tells me that technology isn't the answer. And this is important because I think a lot of young people especially just see, hey, the world is good because technology and medicine, and it's going to solve all of our problems. Look, I love technology and I love medicine, but it doesn't solve that problem of the evil of the human heart that has to be addressed. And I think it's only addressed by God.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we're getting near the end of the hour, so thank you so much for being on here, man. It's been a really great conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really enjoy, Ryan, anytime.
I think that, hopefully you guys out there will, listening to this, will really kind of take some of the stuff into consideration and think maybe, this is one of the things I've been kind of thinking about a lot lately, maybe we should stop blaming everyone for turning into atheists and looking at ourselves and asking the question, what are we as believers in Yeshua, whether that's Christian, Messianic, or even the Jewish world, what are we doing wrong that is driving so many people away from this? And it's not just about bad theology. there's something more
indeed.
than that.
Yeah, if I may add a comment to that too, Ryan. I was at this Proclaim Music Festival.
You're breaking up here.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I was at this festival, and one thing that was encouraging to me was it was run by young people. Young people actually hosted this thing, like I think 21-year-old and some others basically put on this whole event. And so there's a ton of young people there, and you got the sense that the young people didn't want to fight about all of these theological problems that have plagued our generation. And that really speaks to me that in Hebrew roots and in the Messianic world, we can do so much better. We can avoid these foolish fights about foolish things. We can major on the majors, and I think that speaks to this generation more than debates about, I don't know, the shape of the world or anything, any of these silly things we get ourselves into. So that it's encouraging to me, and I think it shows, we've erred in our generation. We've focused on too many minor issues, and that's a turnoff to young people. So I'm encouraged to see that some young people are moving in the right direction.
That's awesome. All right, well, everyone out there, you guys can check out Judah. Please do blog.judahgabriel.com. You can also go to messianicradio.com, which I'm guessing probably a lot of you already were on there. You probably just didn't know who actually ran it, since I don't see Judah taking any credit on the website here. And then messianicchords.com is his other website.
Yeah.
So, and for those of you who are members of my website, if you hadn't heard the news, we've officially made the switch over. The website is now faithofmessiah.com.
Awesome.
Your memberships automatically transfer over. You just have to create a new password. And for those of you who are not members, what are you waiting for? Hopefully the website will continue to grow and continue to grow better looking. I've been working on a lot of this stuff and learning how to do all this stuff on my own. So, all right. Well, thank you all for joining in. We'll see you again next time. Shalom, everyone.